Speaking of space, we were down here about a month ago for an offsite, and it's a really good space. And it's been amazing how they transformed this open space into such an intimate space. I mean, you guys are like right here. This is crazy. So I should say up front, if anyone has a pacemaker in the first couple rows, you ought to move back, because if you haven't noticed, I am magnetic. So I'm going to begin. So the theme is crossover. This is taller than I am. The theme is crossover, and I'm going to begin with just a super brief little bio of myself here and my life more than my work, really, because to me, my life has kind of felt like a crossover life. So I'm just going to begin on sort of a high level there. These are all me. And so I've always kind of felt like I'm on the other side or the outside or something, but I haven't ever really felt out of place. So when I think about what that is, I think about crossover. It's not about leaving a place or leaving your foundation. Crossover is about moving between seemingly different experiences to establish that foundation in you. So then I become the consistent thread. It's my narrative, and if I'm paying attention to it as I move through these, which is self-research, then I can recognize what's truly me, and I can bring that full me to any experience or any place that I go. So these are the mini-me's here. So when I was a little kid, I was a fat little kid, which is to say I wasn't really a little kid ever. But I was a happy little kid, and I played baseball. So I was like the kid. I crossed over from 6 bowls of cereal after school straight over to being in the locker room with all the really fit guys playing baseball, like on the school team. And I felt comfortable with that. After I headed off to school. I went to Ball State for architecture. That's the second picture there, and I was in a band. Everyone who was there was like 5 years, my bandmates were like 5 years older than me, so all the friends I made up there were 5 years older. So I kind of crossed over to this group of friends that were definitely in a different place in life than me, and I felt comfortable enough there. Except while I was there, I flunked out twice in the same year, which meant I had the gumption to talk myself back into college so that they could then kick me out again. So then I moved back to Indianapolis, and I joined another band there. And in that, I was the only non-Caribbean member in a Caribbean band, so you could probably pick me out of the band. And again, it was really comfortable, but it was like finding my place in that mix. While I was in Indianapolis, it was like 7 or 8 years that it took me to save up enough money to get back to school and get my grades up too. So then when I did that, I went to New York and I went to Parsons. But then, second time through college, I went from being the youngest guy in my group to being definitely the oldest guy at Parsons, well, at least in the product design department. So again, I felt very comfortable with my sense of purpose there, but it was sort of an odd man out situation. Then after graduating, my wife, Miho, who's right there and is a better designer than me, and I started our own studio in New York. And starting our own studio in New York, we didn't have a penny to our name. We didn't get investor startup money. And all we had one contract with a watch company. We said, that's good enough, let's go. But that put me in this world with New York designers as colleagues and really good friends, but these people had really great travel budgets. They were able to actually buy and furnish their nice places with the furniture they designed. I was able to design stuff and say that I did that. So again, slightly out of place. But we were able to take that little company and turn it into a company, international company. We had international clients. We were designing in Japan, Italy, Switzerland, just around the world. And we took that international company and we left New York City, we left Brooklyn, and we went to the Hudson Valley. So that's the next picture. That's me and one of our neighbors, Alma. So we took this international company where we were talking to international people, working for them, up to where now what surrounded us while we were doing our work were friendly people like Alma, no designers, no people who really cared about design, bluebirds, wild turkeys, and red foxes. So again, we were a little bit out of place there, but it felt like exactly the right place for us. We were sort of centered there. While I was there, I started a band. Music is available on iTunes. And I'm not, people could tell you, I'm not a very good musician. I can write songs, but I'm not a good musician. But I was able to play with these amazing musicians who are now like on tour with really, like very famous bands. So they're really good, they're school trained, and I felt comfortable in the mix with these people, with what I brought to that mix. And they enjoyed it, and what we were doing at the time, and still doing, is playing really poppy songs that are basically anti-corporate and almost socialist. And so that's what we were doing. We were having a lot of fun. We were doing silly skits on stage and really silly propaganda. So then that guy who is writing songs that are kind of anti-corporate and socialist moves to conservative West Michigan to work for a corporation. And I gotta say, I still feel like I'm in the right place. The me that I bring to these different situations still feels right in that. So that's kind of the wandering story of me. Because I'm comfortable crossing over, and I invite that difference. So I was comfortable when Julia said, hey, the theme for this month would be crossover. I'm like, I can do that one. We'll see if I can do that one, but I feel like I can do that one. So that's my intro about myself. What I want to talk about is, I'll talk about what crossover means to me. I'll talk about what I think crossover should or could mean to us as 21st century designers. But I'm really going to ground this whole thing geekily in crossover as a way of seeing. So not necessarily thinking, but crossover as a way of seeing, so that we make the connections that bring things together. And the best way I know to do that is expose you to the thinking of a person who I think possessed the most creative mind I've ever come across. And he was not a designer, he was Gregory Bateson.
He was always learning from everyone and everything around him. As a child, I learned from him that learning never stops.
Gregory Bateson challenged us to rethink or to stand back and try to perceive in a different way, to see how reality is actually operating.
He was interested in larger patterns. He was interested in how things are connected, and especially how living things are connected.
Gregory said, "The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. What does it even mean to change the way we think?"
And he asked the question, what is there about our way of perceiving that makes us not see the delicate interdependencies in an ecological system that give it its integrity? We don't see them, and therefore we break them.
You have a system, and when you poke it here instead of something happening there, it happens that way, or in a barely recognizable dimension. And that's because it's a very complex system.
The nature of the world in which I live, and in which I wish you lived, all of you, and all the time. But even I don't live in it all the time. There are times when I catch myself believing that there is such a thing as something which is separate from something else.
So that's a little bit of introduction to Bateson. He was married to Margaret Mead. He did seminal work so think about this as crossover. He did seminal work in anthropology, psychiatry, biology, sociology, linguistics and communication theory, and he co-founded cybernetic systems thinking. So his way of thinking is crossover. It was tangential thinking, it was orthogonal thinking. So I'm going to use the first few slides to bring up some things that he talked about to get you in that mind frame. So you guys have the advantage, your visual people, your designers, your thinkers. So bring your design elements thinking to these next slides as we move through these. So this is some of the Bateson stuff. But okay, so if you were from another planet, how do you recognize this as having been a living thing? You can answer, but you don't have to. Okay, I can continue.
Legs.
Makes sense. See, but as designers, like, be formalists about this, you know, so don't think about quantities, think about relationships, think about shapes, think about forms, relationship between parts. So you can look at it and you can say, okay, bilateral symmetry, right? Symmetry, we get that one. One claw is larger than the other, though, so it's really kind of asymmetric. So we can maybe discard that. But then we don't, because we are pattern thinkers. You know, we're designers. We see patterns. And if you look at it, you say that, sure, one's larger than the other, but they're each made of the same parts. So you discard asymmetry in favor of the deeper symmetry of formal relationship of parts. Then you see, from head to tail, this repetitive, rhythmical form with modulation, so larger down to smaller, and that's the way, that's embryology, that's what we are too. So, you know, embryology starts at the top and goes to the tail, so there's actually messaging going down as it moves. So you see that repetitive, rhythmical form with modulation, which sounds like musical terms right there. So what we're looking at here, you call first order connections. So it's the internal logic that makes this thing up. And you know, we understand that from design, the internal logic we put into something. That's first order logic. But there's also the second order of connections, and that reaches outside of the crab. So what I was talking about, this homology is what they call it, but like the idea of this repetitive rhythmical change that moves from head to tail. If you look at that, then you can start thinking, that's not unlike my rib cage. You start seeing the pattern that connects that to me, and then you start saying, that it points to that, and Bates, and then you say, okay, so that crosses our understanding of ourself out into something else, or out into everything else. And when that happens, empathy can't be far behind. So that increases our circle of empathy from a thought process. So Bateson realized what he was really asking people when he was asking, how do you recognize this as a living thing? He realized he was asking, how are you related to this creature? And what's the pattern that connects you to it? So think about those thoughts from a design standpoint. There's the first order of connections. When we design something, we put an internal logic into it. So we know we're taking choices out of what a user can do with it, because we're choosing what we put into it. And we know, just like cooking, most of the universe stays out. We're choosing what goes in. That's the internal logic of the thing. That's what we think about, and that's what gives it its integrity in and of itself. But then there's that second order of logic. So how does that pattern, how does that creation of yours then relate, connect to the world that it's going to go inside of? And that is people. And when we say people, we're talking about cognitive, physical, emotional, spiritual aspects of a person. How does the thing you're making relate to that? How does the thing you're making relate to the ecosystem too? So I'll just flip through some slides here. So second order connection things, just think about that. There's a pattern that crosses over or between the crab and the lobster that connects them. So what's common between this and that? There's a pattern that crosses over the orchid and the primrose, which connects them. So what crosses over between this and that? What's the meta pattern that's common in both? And what connects primrose to the lobster, to the crab, to the orchid, and all those to me? And then what connects me to you? When you start recognizing that pattern that connects, you start thinking things like, shit, where do I end? You know? And if you take that thought, where do I end? Think about it with a blind man. I mean, so I could say, I end, you know, I'm bounded here, so I end right here. So think about the blind person. The blind person has a cane. So does the blind person end at his hand? Or does he end at the end of that sensory contact, at the end of the cane? Is that the end of his body? And if what is happening at the end of that cane is feedback from the world around him, that's perception, does he end at his hand? Does he end at the end of the cane? Or is he the whole world? Is all the feedback him too? And you think about that as a designer. So I don't end at my physical boundary. I don't end here. I have a tool, so let's call it a pencil. So I have a pencil. The pencil is me too. So the concept drawn is also me. So I extend out to that. So also the industrial product in the process that's directed from that sketch is me also. I cross over all those things as me. I bring me to all those aspects, which means my empathy extends throughout that entire process. And my considerations at the beginning have to extend that far out also. I'm totally in the game. That's what we do. The philosopher Teilhard de Chardin said, Nothing's precious save what is yourself in others and others in yourself. And if you can strip away the superficiality and recognize the pattern that connects me to you, not in the formal way of the crap, but I'm talking in this whole well-being sense, then you can design for what is yourself in others and others in yourself. When we talk about others, we're talking about the end user, we're talking about the client, we're talking about the ecosystem, we're talking about the entire system that we're parts and participants inside of. So think about that. So here's the gratuitous part where I show some stuff I did, which I don't like doing. But I can recognize myself in a client who has immeasurable spirit and love and celebrates the full and diverse flavors of life. This is Patrizia Moroso, and she's a full of life person. And I can find myself in her story. I can find the pattern that connects me to her, and because of that, I can non-verbally communicate something of what is common and meaningful to both of us, with an understanding that the industrial product that comes from that is grounded in this thing that an end user can also, I can communicate to an end user. I can recognize myself in a client who champions the sensual nature of life, and in doing so passionately breathes that life into his work. That's Pier Luigi Forgetto. That's a piece I did for him. But because I can find myself in his story, I can non-verbally communicate something that's common and meaningful to both he and I, that I know, because it crosses over between us, is common to end users too. It's the pattern that we share. I can recognize myself in a client who designs their design brief focusing on basically design me a spirit catcher. Objects that communicate a shared spirit and an aspiration. So we've designed for Swatch, Omega, Rado, and Hamilton, and project for Hamilton was capture the American pioneer and sense of optimism. So, give me something like that, I can do that. I can find that for you. Corporate and residential interior architecture, that's a gift. Doing space is fantastic. It's a gift because you have the user directly in front of you. So when we're designing, mass-produced things, we have this anonymous user. We have great research. That's wonderful. But the person, there isn't that real person at the end. There's an anonymous, almost amalgamated user we're designing for. And we need to be empathetic to that. And it's easy, again, when you see the pattern that connects you. If I am you, I can design for me empathetically and get there. But when you're designing for a client and they're right in front of you, making that connection, seeing that realization on their face. We have a group at Steelcase called Quest. We have these meetings once a month. And we just have people come in and talk about their passion. And we had Shakespeare actors come in and talk one time. And they were talking about what it's like. They perform with the lights up in the place. And they were talking about what it's like to perform and why they go to the trouble of doing this. It's gotta be easier to stay at home with your boyfriend, girlfriend on the sofa and watch a movie. But why do they go to this trouble? It's not unlike why we do. This idea of connecting. I want to connect. I want to send a message. I want to better you. If I can only do it in the smallest way, I still want to do that. I want to connect. I want to reach out. That's what life does. That's why they go up on stage too. When the lights are up in the place, they get to see the faces. So when they were trying to explain that, the first way they said it is, it's community. And then she checked herself and said, no, it's beyond that. It's communion. You can know that that's what you're doing as a designer when you understand there's a pattern that connects you to the end user and you're reaching out and you're crossing over you to that person. And so the interior thing's great because you actually have that person. So just like the actors, you get to read that on their face when the connection's made. I can recognize myself in a client who already has an established design vocabulary. I know when I came to Steelcase, that guy over there, with his face and his chin over there, had asked me at the interview, he's like, hey, you have a sense of style about you. How do you see that fitting in at Steelcase? And I knew I could find my place there. Yeah. It was a great question, too. It was challenging. It was good. And I knew I could do it because Steelcase does have an established vocabulary, so we can't all come into that place and be Ricky to his fullest extent and Vaughn to his fullest and do that. But what I can do is I can find my moral, if I can find my moral compass in the value of that client who already has that established vocabulary, that's all I need. I want to communicate those values is what I'm out to do, not the aesthetic. That's a way of getting there. So Steelcase has a great set of values about people, well-being, and the environment. It's very easy to figure out how I'm aligned with that and how I can do good work with that kind of alignment. I can recognize myself in a client who champions the full well-being of its users. and is out to express empathy. So I work for Steelcase Health now. And because of what I just said there, that's why I think designing for healthcare is absolutely the best work there is if you're a designer. I'm super happy to be designing for healthcare because it's the vested interest of me to design for your whole well-being. You want it. And in healthcare, the buyer, the facility person, has vested interest in that shared goal. So it's a really great place to be as a designer. So it's very easy to find yourself in there. And again, it's not about the language you're using. It's about why I showed up to this place in the first place. I can recognize myself in a project that has no restriction or boundaries. So this is the second album cover. So this is my music, which again is available on iTunes. I'm saying it. But I think this is like the ultimate test because this is the one that asks if you know yourself when there are no landmarks around to define you. It asks, do you have a foundation within you when there's no foundation to stand on? You know, it's the project that comes to you and says, I give you no restrictions, bring it. So I think that's an ultimate test for you. And I think the ultimate test of that is to find out if if the meaning that you give to it, the thing that you're drawing out of yourself, actually connects to other people, because that's what it's about. We're always sending out messages, right? I can think I have something to give, but does it connect? Okay, so metaphor talks about relationships, so I think it's the ultimate crossover. So metaphor that I've been talking about is, I am you. The crab is the lobster. This is that. Bateson's point is that metaphor is how nature communicates. So the repetitive anatomy, biology, embryology, it's all, nature talks in relationships. That's how evolution is moved. It's not moved by saying things and parts. But I want to say, so it says profound, right? I just said something profound, and I called it out also. But nature, so the core of communication is metaphor. And I want to say that as designers, we are amazingly powerful because this is also the way designers communicate. We communicate metaphorically. So design, art, which we embrace, poetry, music, and dance speak metaphorically. So, from Swan Lake, the ballerina is a swan. That's a metaphor. The ballerina is a swan, sort of. She's neither a ballerina at that moment, nor is she actually a swan, right? She's a metaphor. She possesses what's common between both. She possesses that grace that both share. And when she puts it in front of us, it gets us to a place that words alone couldn't get us. We could talk forever about what that thing is that they share, or we could put a metaphor in front and let you pull those two things together and find the meaning that goes beyond words alone. So that's dance, but design, all these things connect deeply in meaningful ways about things that words alone can't convey, which is where we get Isadora Duncan's quote, the dancer Isadora Duncan's quote, if I could tell you what it meant, there'd be no point in dancing it. If that wasn't true, KitchenAid would just need an engineering department because an engineer can figure out how to whip butter into flour, right? So we bring this other thing to it. If I recognize what's common between you and me, I am you in the metaphoric sense, I can communicate with you via chair, architecture, dance, music, any number of things. It's just that first recognition, and the recognition involves me finding myself first. Metaphor allows me to design for what's myself and others and myself. I am you. It allows me to recognize myself in my work. The chair is me. It allows me to recognize myself in new experiences and new places. They become me, I become them. I am Steelcase, Steelcase is me. In the way that connects us, in that more profound way. And I think recognizing yourself is critical for 21st century designers. Because I think 21st century design, it's orchestration. It's not the specialties. It's not siloed anymore. It's us coming together. When I want to talk about braiding the physical and digital, I can't do that. It's an orchestrated team that need to come together for that. I need Julia. I need software designers. I need all these people to make this happen. If you're developing an app, you need the device that it goes on. We're coming together. This is an era of orchestration, not siloed speciality. It's about crossing over, sharing openly, open sourcing, sharing ideas, not hoarding and protecting the ideas. We have to be open with each other. The thing that comes up when you're open about sharing these things is you let down boundaries that have protected you before. It's been like, no, you're a graphic designer. You stay over there. I'll hand you what I need to get done. I'm an industrial designer. I'll stand over here. We've defined this boundary that we need to cross over as tradesmen. And what I think is really critical for 21st century is to redefine why we're coming together in the first place. So, first knowing yourself by cross disciplines, recognize patterns that connect you to this, you to that, entering new experiences, find what's common to you and core to you, and then always showing up with that. So when I get together with Julie to work on a project, what I want is that amazing thing that Julia is when she comes in the room. Now she has a toolbox of talent that's going to come with it, but that's that's table stakes, right? If that's what she wanted to protect, she's putting a wall up there. And if that's how she wants to define herself, that's limiting. But if she comes into the room bringing, that full sense of what Julia is, as long with the skills that are going to help us get it done, and if I come into the room with my understanding as Vaughn, we can do amazing things together. But it's defining ourselves, the reason we're coming together, on this core level of what kind of connects us, and what we see as common patterns that resonate between us and with the world around, we're going to put our things into. That's what I got.